You saw him at Baden, and it was at Baden that I also first knew him. You had left the baths when my mother and I arrived. We became acquainted with Sir Boyville. He was still handsome, he was rich, and those qualities of mind which ill agreed with Alitha's finer nature did not displease a fashionable woman of the world. Such was my mother. Something that was called an attachment sprang up, and they married. She preferred the situation of wife to that of widow, and he, having been accustomed to the social comforts of a domestic circle, despite his disasters, disliked his bachelor state. They married, and I, just then 18, just out, as it is called, became the sister of my beloved Gerard. I feel pride when I think of the services that I have rendered him. He had another fall from his horse not long after, or rather, again urging the animal down a precipice, it fell. He was underneath, and his leg was broken. During the long confinement that ensued, I was his faithful nurse and companion. Naturally lively, yet I could sympathize in his sorrows. By degrees I won his confidence. He told me all his story, all his feelings. He grew mild and soft under my influence. He grew to regret that he had been vanquished by adversity so as to become almost what he was accused of being, a frantic idiot. As he talked of his mother and the care she bestowed on his early years, he wept to think how unlike he was to the creature she had wished him to become. A desire to reform, to repair past faults, to school himself, grew out of such talk. He threw off his sullenness and gloom. He became studious at the same time that he grew gentle. His education, which had proceeded but badly while he refused to lend his mind to improvement, was now the object of his own thoughts and exertions. Instead of careering wildly over the hills, or being thrown under some tree delivered up to miserable reverie, he asked for masters, and was continually seen with a book in his hands. The passion of his soul still subsisted, modulated by his new feelings. He continued to believe in the innocence of his mother, though he often doubted her existence. He longed inexpressibly to unveil the mystery that shrouded her fate. He devoted himself in his heart to discovering the truth. He resolved to occupy his whole life in the dear task of reinstating her in that cloudless purity of reputation, which he intimately felt she had never deserved to forfeit. He considered the promise exacted from him by his father as preventing him from following up his design, and as binding him till he was 21. Till then, he deferred his endeavors. No young spendthrift ever aspired for the attainment of the age of freedom and the possession of an estate as vehemently as did Gerard for the hour which was to permit him to deliver himself wholly up to this task. Before that time arrived I married. I wished to take him abroad with us, but the unfounded, as I believe, notion that the secret of his mother's fate is linked to the English shores made him dislike to leave his native country. It was only on our return that he consented to come as far as Marseille to meet us. When he had reached the age of 21, he announced to his father his resolve to discover his mother's fate. Sir Boyville was highly indignant. The only circumstance that at all mitigated the disgrace of his wife's flight was the oblivion into which she and all concerning her had sunk. To have new inquiries set on foot, and the forgotten shame recalled to the memories of men, appeared not less wicked than insane. He remonstrated, he grew angry, he stormed, he forbade, but Gerard considered that time had set a limit to his authority, and only withdrew in silence, not the less determined to pursue his own course. I need not say that he met with no success. A mystery so impenetrable at first does not acquire clearness after time has obscured the little ever known. Whatever were the real circumstances and feelings that occasioned her flight, however innocent she might then be, time has cemented his mother's union with another and made her forget those she left behind. Or may I not say, what I am inclined to believe, that though the violence of another was the cause at last of guilt in her, yet she pined for those she deserted, that her heart was soon broken, that the sod has long since covered her form, while the miserable man who caused all this evil is but too eager to observe a silence which prevents his name from being loaded with the execrations he deserves. I cannot help, therefore, regretting that Gerard insists upon discovering the obscure grave of his miserable mother, while he, who, whether living or dead, believes her to have been always innocent, is to be dissuaded by no arguments, still less by the angry denunciations of Sir Boyville, whose conduct throughout he looks on as being the primal cause of his mother's misfortunes. I have told you the tale, as nearly as I can, in the spirit in which Gerard himself would have communicated it. Such was my tacit pledge to him, nor do I wish, by my suspicions or conjectures, to deprive him of your sympathy and the belief he wishes you to entertain of his mother's innocence. But truth will force its way, and who can think her wholly guiltless? Would to God! Oh, how often and how fervently have I prayed that Gerard were cured of the madness which renders his life a wild, unprofitable dream, and looking soberly on the past, consent to bury in oblivion misfortunes and errors which are beyond all cure, and which it is worse than vain to remember. Chapter 21. There was to Elizabeth a fascinating interest in the story related by Lady Cecil. Elizabeth had no wild, fairy-like imagination. Her talents, which were remarkable, her serious, thoughtful mind, was warmed by the vital heat emanating from her affections. Whatever regarded these moved her deeply. Here was a tale full of human interest, of love, error, of filial tenderness, and deep-rooted, uneradicable fidelity. Elizabeth, who knew little of life, except through such experience as she gathered from the emotions of her own heart and the struggling passions of Falkner, could not regard the story in the same worldly light as Lady Cecil. There was an unfathomable mystery, but was there guilt as far as regarded Mrs. Neville? Elizabeth could not believe it. She believed that in a nature as finely formed as hers was described to have been, maternal love, and love for such a child as Gerard, must have risen paramount to every other feeling. Philosophers have said that the most exalted natures are endowed with the strongest and deepest-seated passions. It is by combating and purifying them that the human being rises into excellence, and the combat is assisted by setting the good in opposition to the evil. Perhaps Mrs. Neville had loved, though even that seemed strange, but her devoted affection to her child must have been more powerful than a love which, did it exist, appeared unaccompanied by one sanctifying or extenuating circumstance. Thus thought Elizabeth. Gerard appeared in a beautiful and heroic light, bent on his holy mission of redeeming his mother's name from the stigma accumulated on it. Her heart warmed within her at the thought that such a task assimilated to hers. She was endeavoring to reconcile her benefactor to life and to remove from his existence the stings of unavailing remorse. She tried to fancy that some secret tie existed between their two distinct tasks, and that a united happy end would spring up for both. After musing for some time in silence, at length she said, "But you do not tell me whither Mr. Neville is now gone, and what it is that has so newly awakened his hopes." "You remind me," replied Lady Cecil, "of what I had nearly forgotten. It is a provoking and painful circumstance, the artifice of cupidity to dupe enthusiasm. You must know that Gerard, in furtherance of his wild project, has left an intimation among the cottages and villages near Dramore, and in Lancaster itself, that he will give £200 to anyone who shall bring any information that will conduce to the discovery of Mrs. Neville's fate. This is a large bribe to falsehood, and yet, until now, no one has pretended to have anything to tell. But the other day he received a letter, and the person who wrote it was so earnest that he sent a duplicate to Sir Boyville. This letter stated that the writer, Gregory Hoskins, believed himself to be in possession of some facts connected with Mrs. Neville of Dramore, and on the £200 being properly secured to him by a written bond, he would communicate them. This letter was dated Lancaster. Thither Gerard is gone." "Does it speak of Mrs. Neville as still alive?" asked Elizabeth. "It says barely the words which I have repeated," Lady Cecil replied. "Sir Boyville, knowing his son's impetuosity, hurried down here to stop, if he could, his reviving through such means the recollection of his unfortunate lady. With what success you have seen. Gerard is gone, nor can anyone guess what tale will be trumped up to deceive and rob him." Elizabeth could not feel as secure as her friend that nothing would come of the promised information. This was not strange. Besides, the different view taken by a worldly and an experienced person, the tale, with all its mystery, was an old one to Lady Cecil, while to her friend it bore the freshness of novelty. To the one, it was a story of the dead and the forgotten. To the other, it was replete with living interest. The enthusiasm of Gerard communicated itself to her, and she felt that his present journey was full of event, the first step in a discovery of all that hitherto had been inscrutable. A few days brought a letter from Gerard. Lady Cecil read it, and then gave it to her young friend to peruse. It was dated Lancaster. It said, "My journey has hitherto been fruitless. This man Hoskins has gone from Lancaster, leaving word that I should find him in London, but in so negligent a way as to lower my hopes considerably. His chief aim must be to earn the promised reward, and I feel sure that he would take more pains to obtain it, did he think that it was really within his grasp. He arrived but a few weeks since, it seems, from America, whither he migrated some 20 years ago from Ravinglas. How can he bring news of her I seek from across the Atlantic? The very idea fills me with disturbance. Has he seen her? Great God, does she yet live? Did she commission him to make inquiries concerning her abandoned child? No, Sophia, my life on it, it is not so, she is dead. My heart too truly reveals the sad truth to me. Can I then wish to hear that she is no more? My dear, dear mother, were all the accusations true which are brought against you, still would I seek your retreat, endeavor to assuage your sorrows. Whatever you are of more worth to me. Methinks that you must still be more worthy of affection than all else that the earth contains. But it is not so. I feel it, I know it, she is dead. Yet when, where, how, oh my father's vain commands, I would walk barefoot to the summit of the Andes to have these questions answered. The interval that must elapse before I reach London and see this man is hard to bear. What will he tell? Nothing. Often, in my lucid intervals, as my father would call them, in my hours of despondency, I fear nothing. You have not played me false, dearest Sophie. In telling your lovely friend the strange story of my woes, you have taught her to mourn my mother's fate, not to suspect her goodness. I am half angry with myself for devolving the task upon you, for despite your kind endeavors, I read your heart, my worldly wise sister, and know its unbelief. I forgive you, for you never saw my mother's face, nor heard her voice. Had you ever beheld the purity and integrity that sat upon her brow, and listened to her sweet tones, she would visit your dreams by day and night, as she does mine, in the guise of an angel robed in perfect innocence. I cannot forgive my father for his accusations. His own heart must be bad, or he could not credit that any evil inhabited hers. For how many years that guileless heart was laid bare to him, and if it was not so fond and admiring towards himself as he could have wished, still there was no concealment, no tortuosity. He saw it all, though now he discredits the evidence of his senses, shuts his eyes, and hooting at the glorious sun in heaven, cries out, "Where is it?" For truth was her attribute, the open heart, which made the brow, the eyes, the cheerful mien, the sweet, loving smile and thrilling voice, all transcripts of its pure emotions. It was this that rendered her the adorable being, which all who knew her acknowledged that she was. I am solicitous beyond measure that Miss Falkner should receive no false impression. Her image is before me when I saw her first, pale in the agony of fear, bending over her dying father. By day and by night she forgot herself to attend on him. She who loves a parent so well can understand me better than any other. She, I am convinced, will form a true judgment. She will approve my perseverance and share my doubts and fears. Will she not? Ask her, or am I too vain, too credulous? Is there in the whole world one creature who will join with me in my faith and my labors? You do not, Sophia, that I have long known, and the feeling of disappointment is already blunted. But it will revive, it will be barbed with a new sting, if I am deceived in my belief that Elizabeth Falkner shares my convictions and appreciates the utility, the necessity of my endeavors. I do not desire her pity that you give me, but at this moment I am blessed by the hope that she feels with me. I cannot tell you the good this idea does me. It spurs me to double energy in my pursuit, and it sustains me during the uncertainty that attends it. It makes me inexpressibly more anxious to clear my mother's name in her eyes, since she deigns to partake my griefs. I desire that she should hereafter share in the triumph of my success. My success, the word throws me 10,000 fathoms deep, from the thoughts of innocence and goodness to those of wrongs, death, or living misery. Farewell, dearest Sophia. This letter is written at night. Tomorrow early I set out by a fast coach to London. I shall write again, or you will see me soon. Keep Miss Falkner with you till I return, and write me a few words of encouragement. Not a line in this letter, but interested and gratified Elizabeth. and Lady Cecil saw the blush of pleasure mantle over her speaking countenance. She was half glad, half sorry. She looked on Elizabeth as she who could cure Gerard of his quixotic devotion, by inspiring him with feelings which, while they had all the enthusiasm natural to his disposition, would detach him from his vain endeavours, and centre his views and happiness in the living instead of the dead. Lady Cecil knew that Gerard already loved her friend. He had never loved before, and the tenderness of his manner, and the admiration that lighted up his eyes whenever he looked on her, revealed the birth of passion. Elizabeth, less quick to feel, or at least more tranquil in the display of feeling, yet sympathized too warmly with him, felt too deeply interested in all he said and did, not to betray that she was touched by the divine fire that smooths the ruggedness of life, and fills with peace and smiles a darkling, stormy world. But instead of weaning Gerard from his madness, she encouraged him in it, as she well knew, for when she wrote to Gerard, she asked Elizabeth to add a few lines, and thus she wrote: "I thank you for the confidence you repose in me, and more than that, I must express how deeply I feel for you, the more that I think that justice and truth are on your side. Whether you succeed or not, I confess that I think you are right in your endeavors. Your aim is a noble and a sacred one, and like you, I cherish the hope that it will end in the exculpation of one deeply injured, and your being rewarded for your fidelity to her memory. God bless you with all the happiness you deserve." No subsequent letter arrived from Gerard. Lady Cecil wondered and conjectured and expected impatiently. She and her friend could talk of nothing else. The strange fact that a traveller from America proclaimed that he had tidings of the lost one offered a fertile field for suppositions. Had Mrs. Neville been carried across the Atlantic? How impossible was this, against her own consent? No pirate's bark was there, with a crew experienced in crime, ready to acquiesce in a deed of violence. No fortalice existed, in whose impenetrable walls she could have been immured. Yet so much of strange and fearful must belong to her fate, which the imagination mourned to think of. Love, though in these days it carries on its tragedies more covertly, and kills by the slow, untold pang, by the worm in the bosom, and exerts its influence rather by teaching deceit than instigating to acts of violence. Yet love reigns in the hearts of men as tyrannically and fiercely, and causes as much evil, as much ruin, and as many tears, as when, in the younger world, hecatombs were slain in his honor. In former days mortals wasted rather life than feeling, and every blow was a physical one. Now the heart dies, though the body lives, and a miserable existence is dragged out, after hope and joy have ceased to adorn it. Yet love is still, despite the schoolmaster and the legislator, the prime law of human life, and ally the Neville was well fitted to inspire an ardent passion. She had a sensibility which, while it gave strength to her affections, yet diffused a certain weakness over the mechanism of her being that made those around her tremble. She had genius which added luster to her eye and shed around her a fascination of manner which no man could witness without desiring to dedicate himself to her service. She seemed the very object whom Sheridan addressed when he said, "For friends in every age you'll meet, and lovers in the young." That she should be loved to desperation could excite no wonder, but what had been the effects of this love? A distant home across the ocean, a home of privation and sorrow, the yearning for her lost children, the slow breaking of the contrite heart, a life dragged on despite the pangs of memory, or a nameless grave. Such were the conjectures caused by the letter of the American. At length Neville returned. Each turned her eye on his face to read the intelligence he had acquired in his speaking countenance. It was sad. She lives and is lost, thought Lady Cecil. He mourns her dead, was the supposition of the single-minded Elizabeth. At first he avoided the subject of his inquiry, and his companions did not question him, till at last he suddenly exclaimed, "Do you not wish to learn something, Sophia? Have you forgotten the object of my journey?" "Dear Gerard," replied Lady Cecil, "these walls and woods, had they a voice, could tell you that we have thought and spoken of nothing else." "She is dead," he answered abruptly. A start and exclamation was the reply. He continued, "If there be any truth in the tale I have heard, my dear, injured mother is dead. That is, if what I have heard concern her, mean anything, or is not a mere fabrication. You shall hear all by and by. I will relate all I have been told. It is a sad story if it be hers, if it be a true story at all." These disjointed expressions raised the curiosity and interest of his auditors to their height. It was evening. Instead of going on with his account, he passed into the adjoining room, opened the glass door, and stepped out into the open air. It was dark, scarcely could you see the dim outline of the woods, yet far on the horizon where sky and sea met, there was a streak of light. Sophia and Elizabeth followed to the room whence he had gone, and drew their chairs near the open window and pressed each other's hands. "What can it all mean?" at length said Lady Cecil. "Hush," whispered Elizabeth. "He is here. I saw him cross the streak of light." "True," said Gerard's voice. His person they could not distinguish, for they were in darkness. "I am here, and I will tell you now all I have heard. I will sit at your feet. Give me your hand, Sophie, that I may feel that you are really present. It is too dark to see anything." He did not ask for Elizabeth's hand, but he took it, and placing it on Lady Cecil's, gently clasped both. "I cannot see either of you, but indulge my wayward humor. So much of course and commonplace has been thrown on the most sacred subject in the world that I want to bathe my soul in darkness, a darkness as profound as that which wraps my mother's fate. Now for my story." Chapter 22. You know that I did not find this man, this Hoskins, at Lancaster. By his direction I sought him in London, and after some trouble found him. He was busy in his own affairs, and it was difficult to get at him, but by perseverance, and asking him to dine with me at a coffee-house, I at last succeeded. He is a native of Ravinglas, a miserable town on the seashore of Cumberland, with which I am well acquainted, for it is not far from Dromore. He emigrated to America before I was born, and after various speculations, is at last settled at Boston in some sort of trade, the exigencies of which brought him over here, and he seized the opportunity to visit his family. There they were, still inhabiting the forlorn town of Ravinglas, their cottage still looking out on a dreary extent of sand, mud, and marsh, and the far mountains which would seem to invite the miserable dwellers of the flats to shelter themselves in their green recesses, but they invite in vain. Hoskins found his mother, a woman nearly 100 years of age, alive, and a widowed sister living with her, surrounded by a dozen children of all ages. He passed 2 days with them, and naturally recurred to the changes that had taken place in the neighborhood. He had at one time had dealings with the steward of Dromore, and had seen my father. When he emigrated, Sir Boyville had just married. Hoskins asked how it went on with him and his bride. It is our glorious fate to be in the mouths of the vulgar, so he heard the story of my mother's mysterious flight. And in addition to this, he was told of my boyish wanderings, my search for my mother, and my declaration that I would give £200 to anyone through whose means I should discover her fate. The words fell at first upon a heedless ear, but the next morning it all at once struck him that he might gain the reward, and he wrote to me, and as I was described as a wanderer without a home, he wrote also to my father. When I saw him in town, he seemed ashamed of the trouble I had taken. "It is I who am to get the £200, he said, "not you. The chance was worth wasting a little breath, but you may not think the little I have to tell worth your long journey." At length I brought him to the point. At one period, a good many years ago, he was a settler in New York, and by some chance he fell in with a man lately arrived from England, who asked his advice as to obtaining employment. He had some little money, some few £100s, but he did not wish to sink it in trade or the purchase of land, but to get some situation with a tolerable salary and keep his little capital at command. A strange way of using money and time in America, but such was the fancy of the stranger. He said he should not be easy unless he could draw out his money at any time and emigrate at an hour's notice. This man's name was Osborne. He was shrewd, ready-witted, and good-natured, but idle and even unprincipled. "He did me a good turn once," said Hoskins, "which makes me unwilling to do him a bad one, but you cannot injure him, I think, in America. He has risen in the world since the time I mention, and has an employment under our minister at Mexico." After all, he did not tell me much, and what I learned came out in long talks by degrees. During a journey or two we took together to the West. He had been a traveler, a soldier in the East Indies, and unlucky everywhere, and it had gone hard with him at one time in Bengal, but for the kindness of a friend. He was a gentleman far above him in station who got him out of trouble and paid his passage to England, and afterward, when this gentleman returned himself to the island, he found Osborne in trouble again, and again he assisted him. In short, sir, it came out that if this gentleman, Osborne would never tell his name, stood his friend, it was not for nothing this time. There was a lady to be carried off. Osborne swore he did not know who, he thought it a runaway match, but it turned out something worse, for never did girl take on so for leaving her home with a lover. I tell the story badly, for I never got the rights of it. It ended tragically, the lady died, was drowned, as well as I could make out, in some river. You know how dangerous the streams are on our coast. It was the naming Cumberland and our estuaries that set me asking questions, which frightened Osborne. When he found that I was a native of that part of the world, he grew as mute as a fish, and never a word more of lady or friend did I get from him, except, as I guessed, he was well rewarded, and sent over the water out of the way, and he swore he believed that the gentleman was dead too. It was no murder, that he averred, but a sad tragic accident that might look like one, and he grew as white as a sheet if ever I tried to bring him to speak of it again. It haunted his thoughts nevertheless, and he would talk in his sleep, and dream of being hanged, and mutter about a grave dug in the sands, and there being no parson, and the dark breakers of the ocean, and horses scampering away, and the lady's wet hair, nothing regular, but such as often made me waken him, for in wild nights such mutterings were no lullaby. Now, sir, whether the lady he spoke of were your lady mother is more than I can say, but the time and place tally. It is 12 years this summer since he came out, and it had just happened, for his heart and head were full of horrors, and he feared every vessel from Europe brought out a warrant to arrest him, or the like. He was a chicken-hearted fellow, and I have known him hide himself for a week when a packet came from Liverpool. But he got courage as time went on. When I saw him last, he had forgotten all about it, and when I jeered him about his terrors, he laughed and said all was well, and he should not care going to England, for that the story was blown over, and neither he nor his friend even so much as suspected. This, sir, is my story, and I don't think he ever told me any more, or that I can remember anything else. But such as I tell it, I can swear to it. There was a lady run off with, and she died, by fair means or foul, before she quitted the coast, and was buried, as we might bury in the far west, without bell or prayer book. And Osborne does not know the name of the lady, but the gentleman he knew, though he has never since heard of him, and believes him to be dead. You best know whether my story is worth the £200. Such, Sophia, is the tale I heard. Such is the coarse hand and vulgar tongue that first touches the veil that conceals my mother's fate. It is a strange story, said Lady Cecil, shuddering. But on my life, a true one, cried Neville, as I will prove. Osborne is now at Mexico. I have inquired at the American consul's. He is expected back to Washington at the end of this summer. In a few weeks I shall embark and see this man, who now bears a creditable character, and learn if there is any foundation for Hoskins's conjectures. If there is, and can I doubt it, if my mother died as he says, I shall learn the manner of her death, and who is the murderer. Murderer, echoed both his auditors. Yes, I cannot retract the word. Murderer in effect, if not in deed. Remember, I witnessed the act of violence which tore my mother from me. He who carried her away is, in all justice, an assassin, even if his hands be not imbrued with blood. Blood, did I say? Nay, none was shed. I know the spot, I have viewed the very scene. Our waste and desolate coast, the perilous, deceitful rivers, in one of which she perished, the very night, so tempestuous, the wild west wind bearing the tide with irresistible impetuosity up the estuaries, he seeking the solitary sands, perhaps some smuggling vessel lying in wait to carry her off unseen, unheard. To me it is as if I knew each act of the tragedy, and heard her last sigh beneath the waves breathed for me. She was dragged out by these men, buried without friend, without decent rites. Her tomb the evil report her enemy raised above her, her grave the sands of that dreary shore. Oh, what wild, what miserable thoughts are these! This tale, instead of alleviating my anxious doubts, has taken the sleep out from my eyes. Images of death are forever passing before me. I think of the murderer with a heart that pants for revenge, and of my beloved mother with such pity, such religious woe, that I would spend my life on that shore seeking her remains, so that at last I might shed my tears above them, and bear them to a more sacred spot. There is an easier way to gain both ends. It is a sad, but a wild and uncertain story, remarked Lady Cecil, and not sufficiently plain, I think, to take you away from us all across the Atlantic." "A far slighter clue would take me so far," replied Gerard, "as you well know. It is not for a traveller to Egypt to measure miles with such timidity. My dear Sophie, you would indeed think me mad if, after devoting my life to one pursuit, I were now to permit a voyage across the Atlantic to stand between me and the slightest chance of having my doubts cleared up. It is a voyage which thousands take every week for their interest or their pleasure. I do much, I think, in postponing my journey till this man returns to Washington. At first I had thought of taking my passage on the instant and meeting him on his journey homeward from Mexico, but I might miss him. Yet I long to be on the spot in America, for if anything should happen to him, if he should die and his secret die with him, how forever after I should be stung by self-reproach." "But there seems to me so little foundation," Lady Cecil began. Neville made an impatient gesture, exclaiming, "Are you not unreasonable, Sophie? My father has made a complete convert of you." Elizabeth interposed and asked, "You saw this man more than once?" "Who, Hoskins? Yes, 3 times, and he always told the same story. He persisted in the main points, that the scene of the carrying off of the lady was his native shore, the coast of Cumberland, that the act immediately preceded Osborne's arrival in America 12 years ago, and that she died miserably, the victim of her wretched lover. He knew Osborne immediately on his coming to New York, when he was still suffering from the panic of such a tragedy, dreading the arrival of every vessel from England. At that time he concealed carefully from his new friend what he afterward, in the overflow of his heart, communicated so freely, and in after times he reminded him how, when an emissary of the police came from London to seek after some fraudulent defaulter, he, only hearing vaguely that there was search made for a criminal, hid himself for several days, that Osborne was privy to, was participator in a frightful tragedy, which to my eyes bears the aspect of murder, seems certain. I cannot doubt that my mother died then and there. How? The blood curdles to ask, but I would compass the earth to learn, to vindicate her name, to avenge her death." Elizabeth felt Gerard's hand tremble and grow cold. He rose and led the way into the drawing-room, while Lady Cecil whispered to her friend, "I am so very, very sorry to go to America on such a story as this, a story which, if it bear any semblance to the truth, had better be forever buried in oblivion. Dear Elizabeth, dissuade him, I entreat you." "Do you think Mr. Neville so easy of persuasion, or that he ought to be?" replied her companion. "Certainly, all that he has heard is vague, coming, as it does, from a third and an interested person. But his whole life has been devoted to the exculpation of his mother. And if he believes that this tale affords a clue to lead to discovery, he is a son, and the nature that stirs within him may gift him with a clearer vision and a truer instinct than we can pretend to. Who can say but that a mysterious yet powerful hand is at last held out to guide him to the completion of his task? Oh, dear Lady Cecil, there are secrets in the moral, sentient world of which we know nothing, such as brought Hamlet's father before his eyes, such as now may be stirring in your brother's heart, revealing to him the truth, almost without his own knowledge." "You are as mad as he," said Lady Cecil peevishly. "I thought you a calm and reasonable being, who would cooperate with me in weaning Gerard from his wild fancies, and in reconciling him to the world as it is. But you indulge in metaphysical sallies and sublime flights, which my commonplace mind can only regard as a sort of intellectual will-o'-the-wisp. You betray instead of assisting me. Peace be with Mrs. Neville, whether in her grave, or, in some obscure retreat, she grieves over the follies of her youth. She has been mourned for, as never mother was mourned before. But be reasonable, dear Elizabeth, and aid me in putting a stop to Gerard's insane career. You can, if you will. He reveres you, he would listen to you. Do not talk of mysterious hands and Hamlet's ghost, and all that is to carry us away to fairyland, but of the rational duties of life and the proper aim of a man to be useful to the living and not spend the best years of his life in dreams of the dead." "What can I say?" replied Elizabeth. "You will be angry, but I sympathize with Mr. Neville, and I cannot help saying, though you scoff at me, that I think that in all he is doing, he is obeying the most sacred law of our nature, exculpating the innocent, and rendering duty to her who has a right, living or dead, to demand all his love." "Well," said Lady Cecil, "I have managed very ill. I had meant to make you my ally and have failed. I do not oppose Gerard in Sir Boyville's open, angry manner, but it has been my endeavor throughout to mitigate his zeal and to change him from a wild sort of visionary into a man of this world. He has talents, he is the heir to large possessions, his father would gladly assist any rational pursuit. He might make a figure in his country, he might be anything he pleased, and instead of this, all is wasted on the unhappy dead. You do wrong to encourage him. Think of what I say, and use your influence in a more beneficial manner." During the following days, this sort of argument was several times renewed. Lady Cecil, who had heretofore opposed Neville covertly, with some show of sympathy, the fallacy of which he easily detected, and who had striven rather to lead him to forget than to argue against his views, now openly opposed his voyage to America. Gerard heard in silence. He would not reply. Nothing she said carried the slightest weight with him, and he had long been accustomed to opposition and to take his own way in spite of it. He was satisfied to do so now without making an effort to convince her. Yet he was hurt and turned gladly to Elizabeth for consolation. Her avowed and warm approval, her anxious sympathy, the certainty she expressed that in the end he would succeed, and that his enthusiasm and zeal were implanted in his heart for the express purpose of his mother's vindication, and that he would fail in every higher duty if he now held back. All this echoed so faithfully his own thoughts, that she already appeared a portion of his existence that he could never part from, the dear and promised reward of all his exertions. In the ardor of her sympathy, Elizabeth wrote to Falkner. She had before written to tell him that she had seen again her friend of Marseille. She wrote trembling, fearful of being recalled home, for she remembered the mysterious shrinking of her father from the name of Neville. His replies, however, only spoke of a short journey he was making and a delay in his own joining her. Now again she wrote to speak of Neville's filial piety, his mother's death, her alleged dishonor, his sufferings and heroism. She dilated on this subject with fond approval and expressed her wishes for his success in warm and eager terms. For many days she had no reply. A letter came at last. It was short. It besought her instantly to return. "This is the last act of duty, of affection I shall ever ask," Falkner wrote. "Comply without demurring, come at once. Come, and hear the fatal secret that will divide us forever. Come, I ask but for a day. The eternal future you will, pass with your new friends." Had the writing not been firm and clear, such words had seemed to portend her benefactor's death. Wondering, struck by fear, inexpressibly anxious to comply with his wishes, pale and trembling, she besought Lady Cecil to arrange for her instant return. Gerard heard with sorrow, but without surprise. He knew, if her father demanded her presence, her first act would be obedience. But he grieved to see her suffer, and he began also to wonder by what strange coincidence they should both be doomed to sorrow through the disasters of their parents. Chapter 23. Falkner had parted with his dear adopted child under a strong excitement of fear concerning her health. The change of air and scene restored her so speedily that his anxieties were of short duration. He was, however, in no hurry to rejoin her, as he was taught to consider a temporary separation from him as important to her convalescence. For the first time after many years, Falkner was alone. True, he was so in Greece, but there he had an object. In Greece, also, it is true that he had dwelt on the past, writing even a narrative of his actions, and that remorse sat heavy at his heart while he pursued this task. Yet he went to Greece to assist in a glorious cause, and to redeem his name from the obloquy his confession would throw on it by his gallantry and death. There was something animating in these reflections. Then also disease had not attacked him, nor pain made him its prey. His sensations were healthful, and if his reflections were melancholy and self-condemning, yet they were attended by grandeur, and even by sublimity, the result of the danger that surrounded him and the courage with which he met it.